Hi, I'm Emily Lively. I'm a speech pathologist and director at Lively Eaters Feeding Therapy in Adelaide. I'm also a researcher through the discipline of speech pathology and the College of Nursing and Health Sciences at Flinders University in South Australia. In addition, I'm a co-founding director of an enteral feeding product, which is a whole food enteral feeding blend. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Sarah Gray and the team at ausEE for providing the platform for many of us from around Australia to speak with families, clinicians, researchers, medical practitioners about feeding tubes, and to raise awareness of the challenges that families experience and also the successes that families experience. So I'm speaking with you today with all three hats on, as a researcher, as a clinician, and also as a founder of a feeding tube product, which is a whole food blend. I am currently enrolled in a PhD through Flinders University under the supervision of Professor Sebastian Dalton and Professor Sue McAllister, so I do acknowledge their input into part of this presentation as well. I am the founding director of Lively Eaters Feeding Therapy in Adelaide, which is a private allied health practice within which I do maintain a clinical role as a speech pathologist, working with our dietitians, our OTs, our infant mental health therapists and our paediatrician to holistically teach families how to teach their child to eat. I'm also very excited to be part of WHOLE Enteral Nourishment. WHOLE is a passion project of mine that I've been working on with our co-founders in Sydney as well for the last 3 years to develop a commercially made real food blended enteral tube formula which actually meets the Food Standards Australia and New Zealand classification for a formulated meal replacement. So really exciting to be able to bring that information to families as well. So what I'd like to support families and clinicians with through this speech is bringing together my experience as a speech pathologist, my experience within feeding disorders and mealtime challenges, my experience with working intensively with families through inpatient program, through our telehealth tube weaning program, and what it is that the families have taught me over this time, which has improved our practice as well. I also feel that without facilitating family meal times and helping families understand their role in their child's ability to eat or drink, it makes it very difficult to move forward with oral eating and drinking. As a clinician and researcher, that's all then been pulled together to help develop Australia's first whole food tube blend, which is recognised under the Food Standards Australia and New Zealand Act as a formulated meal replacement. Little bit of information there about WHOLE. It's a shelf-stable, commercially available food which is suitable for tube feeding via the pump and syringe. It has 18 vitamins and minerals, is suitable for children to adults, and to assist with those families, whether they be adults or children with food allergies. It has no nuts, dairy, soy, and is GMO free. You can find more information about WHOLE on our website there, which is just down in the bottom corner. So let's talk a little bit more about tube weaning. What we know about tube weaning, we know that lots of babies survive infancy now, whereas in the past they may not have. And I guess this tube feeding presentation is looking at children who are tube fed, not so much adults who've developed the requirement for tube feeding later in their life. We know that lots more children are using tubes. We also know that successful weaning is really complex. It's not a simple equation of reduced tube volume, child will eat. It is time and emotionally intensive, not only for the families, but also for the clinicians and the medical team involved as well. So it's not something that it just happens, and it's not something that just happens without experienced, dedicated support to facilitate it happening. I'd like to share with you some of my current research. The first study that I completed was looking at what are the different approaches to tube weaning. There are lots of different approaches around the world, and I wanted to pull that information together to help families and practitioners understand what are the different ways that tube weaning can happen. I've then looked at what variables can predict the time that it takes to wean, so that we can better understand where children are at and whether they are more likely or less likely to take longer times to wean. And then my current study, which I'm just about finished writing up, is looking at how do parents experience tube feeding and weaning, because we know that for a child to successfully learn to eat and to maintain oral eating and drinking, that the parents really need to understand their role in that experience, their role as facilitators, and that they actually have such a powerful, important part to play that I think in many instances is not disregarded to a degree, but is not utilised to the best of what parents can offer us. So if you'd like some further information on all the actual approaches to weaning, there's the journal article there that you can look up, or I can share the links with you for. But basically, in summary, we had a look at what the published approaches are. We have behavioural approaches to weaning, and I know that there are a few therapists this week who are speaking about behavioural approaches to weaning. We have biomedical approaches to weaning, in which weaning occurs through the manipulation of prescribed medications or stimulation of certain senses, or just manipulating tube feed volumes without providing any additional support or training as well. And then we also have the child and family approaches, and in the child and family centred approaches, we have caregivers as a central component of those approaches. Rewards and external pressure are not utilised, but the child is supported to become aware of their internal state and to self-initiate a response to that. Often with the child and family approaches, a multidisciplinary team is involved, and the tube feeding volumes are manipulated as part of the process in order to assist with achieving the desired oral behaviours. What outcome variables are measured and reported by many of these programs? There's a great range of different outcome variables. What it means is that it's very difficult to compare programs because you're not comparing apples with apples. So when we have a look at the different, changes in children that have been described in these programs, they might be around mealtime behaviours. So, does the child scream at the table? Can they come and sit at the table? Do they need active distraction? Are they still running around the house with you chasing them for them to eat? Some programs have looked at the impact on the caregiver and how the caregiver's emotional state, mental capacity, physical capacity changes as their child learns to eat. Many programs report on the change in oral skills. So does the child learn to bite, chew, swallow more textured foods? be able to suck through a straw? What is it that changes in the oral skill? We also look at oral consumption, so how much does the child eat or drink? And I guess indirect, not comparison, but as oral consumption changes, what happens to tube use then? Does tube use change throughout the programs? It's important to report on anthropometrics. So what is their weight? What does their height do? What is their head circumference? Are they growing? What is their growth trajectory? What is their BMI and how is that tracking on their own growth curve? These are all reported outcomes of weaning. So you can't just say to a provider, are you successful, or what is your success rate? Because success could be measured on any of these variables, and so it's a little bit more difficult than just saying what's your success rate. And Dovey, to bring in a little bit of the research, has made it very clear that it's very difficult to compare tube weaning programs internationally, and there is no optimal tube weaning program that has been described. What this research team have put forward is to become or to be an optimal tube weaning program, we need to look at what foods and drinks the child is taking in and what's that doing to their weight, the role of food in the social environment of mealtime. So food and drink and eating is about a social experience. So can this child eat in different environments, or can they only eat in a certain structured environment? Does a program individually tailor the intervention to your family? So we know at Lively Eaters that every family is so different. The dynamic between mum and dad is different. The dynamic between siblings is different. The demands on the family are different. The capacity of the family is different. And therefore we need to consider what is actually functional and practical and realistic for each family. How do we assess whether children are suitable for weaning and whether they're ready for weaning? And how do these new behaviours that children are learning as they're learning to eat, how do they generalise into kindy, into school, into university, into living in supported accommodation? Are these behaviours generalising into all food environments that the child's in? What I would like to propose as well to this framework is looking at whether or how parents are key to successful weaning outcomes, and the impact of tube weaning on positive child development in terms of parent-child relationships. So there's still some work to do, but it is being done on looking at what is the best tube weaning program and how do we all as therapists help bring these concepts into our programs to provide what is researched as the optimal tube weaning approach. To run you through another study that I've done, we've looked at, are there specific variables that predict the time that it will take children to wean? So this is looking at, there's the reference and the publication for that there, but this is looking at, do factors influence how long it will take a child to learn to eat and drink? Does the age of the child make a difference? Yes, we found that it did help predict how long it would take a child to wean. Likewise, the length of time that they'd been tube fed before you started weaning also predicted the length of time it would take them to learn how to eat and drink orally. How medically complex these little ones are. There are some extremely medically complex children, and yes, that does impact how long it takes them to wean. It doesn't mean they can't wean, but what the data is showing us is that it can influence how long it takes them to learn to eat and drink. The type of tube also had an influencing factor. Interestingly, prior oral experience and prior mealtime behaviours do not predict how long it will take a child to eat and drink. So what this is saying is that even the children who have never eaten or had anything to drink orally before can still learn to eat and drink orally in a relatively similar time to children who do have some oral experience. And likewise, the children that run around the house, can't sit still, can't sit down, need a lot of distraction to be able to eat, need a lot of bribing or, supported eating. Equally, that didn't predict how long it would take these children to learn to eat and drink. So I guess what the important summary from this study shows that all children should be given the opportunity to learn to eat. Just because they don't eat a certain amount yet, or they don't drink a certain amount yet, or they can't sit at the table and touch and lick and sniff and smell X number of foods, doesn't mean that they're not ready to wean, or doesn't mean that they shouldn't be given the opportunity to learn what to do. This data also shows us that biological factors alone can't predict the time that it takes to wean, and therefore what else is impacting? If it's not just about their age and their medical status, what else is coming into play that impacts how long it takes a child to learn to eat and drink? And that's what led me to the next bit of research, is looking at, well, if it's not biological or medical factors, what is the role that parents play in children's success of learning to eat and drink? And how do parents actually experience tube feeding and tube weaning? Because whilst the child has the tube, it's the parent that is managing everything else around that tube, and that can be super stressful for parents. It can be emotionally and physically draining for parents. It can be emotionally and physically draining for other siblings and for the family. And if we don't understand as practitioners and professionals how the parent is actually coping, then we're missing one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle. So what I've done, and I've nearly finished writing up, is looking at what are the parents' reflections of their experience as their child transitions from tube to oral feeding in the context of an intensive intervention program. Because we know how tube feeding impacts families, there's research on that. We also know how tube weaning impacts children. There's research that's shown the positive changes in children after they've been tube weaned. What we don't yet know is how parents experience tube weaning and how parents are able to implement the strategies and maintain the strategies, and what other factors that facilitate, or what are the barriers to parents being able to continue with teaching their child to eat and drink. If we can understand what it's like for parents, we can use this information to help parents who haven't been through this journey yet, or who are in the very early stages of this journey of looking at, my child is tube fed, how do I teach them to eat and drink? We can use this information, this really powerful information from parents who have been through it, to put in place much sooner, so that they don't, new parents don't experience what we know lots of other parents have experienced. And so what parents have told us is that they felt unprepared. They didn't know about tube feeding, or what it actually involved, or how long it might actually last for. They didn't know options for tube weaning once they realised that actually this tube isn't just coming out. Parents told us that they felt very much in a medical care model, and that what they would prefer is that they become part of the process rather than having a process done to them. So it's not an intervention that is done to them, but that they need to be part of the process. by experiencing these circumstances where parents have felt that they've had things done to them, they've become much more empowered. They've become empowered to find their own teams, to find their own answers, to find alternatives, to look at their child and their bigger picture, and they feel empowered to go out and find that information and act on that information. Once they've built their confidence and their competence with understanding their child, with understanding what is being offered to them around tube feeding, around tube weaning, and these parents then often go and seek their own team because they're feeling that their needs are not being met by the team that they are currently working with, and they have an innate sense that there must be something better, or there must be something different, or my child can do better. I need to find the people that can facilitate that in my child. And through this process, they're really developing trust in their own child. Their trust the trust in their child that their child can do it, their child can learn, their child can overcome the dependency that they have developed on the tube, or they can overcome the dysphagia, the swallowing difficulties that they have. They can overcome the fact that they can't yet chew. Parents really believe in their children, and we really need to support parents in accepting that belief is wrong, because it's there in supporting that belief so that we can get the best out of the children and the families as well. So just to roll over these, what parents are telling us is that they have an experience of learning to parent a child with medical needs and additional needs. They learn to move from a medical parent of administering this medication, reinserting this tube, going to these review appointments, to becoming a relational parent, a parent that is responding to what their child is telling them, or what it looks like their child is able to do or is showing that they can do. And in doing so, parents have a shift in the perception of the necessity of the tube. Is this tube really necessary? Initially, this tube was life-saving, there's no doubt about it. But parents go through this experience of saying, but just a minute, it was life-saving back then. We're 9 months down the track. My child's developing well. Medically, they're safe, they're stable, everything's under control. Why do they still need this tube? And parents have this shift. They describe a shift of, just a minute, this isn't life-saving and necessary anymore. It's just there and it's not going anywhere. And what we're doing is not shifting it. So is it really needed? And if it's not really needed, how do parents go about making that decision and having that reasoning around, well, is it needed or isn't it needed? And if it's not needed, how do parents make the decision to say, right, we need to find something different to help our child to get off this tube? And that involves putting trust into someone external, a different team, a different perspective, perhaps people that they haven't been with since the start of their child's journey or birth. And that's a big step for parents to take that leap and say, what we're doing isn't making the progress that we would like to see for our child. Therefore, we are going to trust in another system, another team, another person to help make these changes. And along that way, then there's obviously a massive emotional journey for parents. Not only are they coping with the chronic health needs of their child, they're also coping with their own emotions that go with this, their perception that their experience of parenting is not what they thought it would be, and that there are many ups and downs along the way. And it really is an emotional journey that parents experience. And parents have talked to us about the aspects that exacerbate those emotions and the aspects that support and facilitate those emotions. And it's really powerful information that parents are teaching us that they've learned along this way. One of the really powerful pieces of information parents have told us is that they feel like there's three distinct players in this learning to eat journey. There are the professional services, there's their child, and then there's them. And what parents are telling us is that actually they would like all of those aspects to merge together to become one experience where the parents are working with their child, working with the medical and professional services for a joint agreed outcome. And what I would like to do through this research is to help move professionals and parents to this model where we're all looking at individual children, individual parents, individual family units, and the individual team that supports that family and how they can work together as a team, rather than it feeling like for parents, which is, this is no finger pointing, it is what parents are telling us is how they've felt, is that they are separate from the rest of the team. And so this, I guess, is just a summary which you can have a read through around what it is that we've learned from a professional aspect, and that is that we cannot underestimate the impact of tube feeding and tube weaning on parents, and that we need to support parents just as much as we provide the therapy to the children. We also need to provide that therapy to the parents. If medically stable, children need to be given the opportunity to learn to eat. And just keeping the status quo is not going to magically help a child learn to eat. They need to be given the opportunity. We also know from parents that if parents feel unheard, they will disengage from services. And so we really want to establish this partnership with parents rather than an explicit teaching-telling relationship. Otherwise, we're going to lose them. What we've learned from a parent point of view is that parents have this innate sense that there has to be something better for their child, and they will seek out that answer or that option until they find it. And by doing so, they really are key members of the team. They know their children the best. We need to provide families with autonomy, with empowerment, with choice. We might not have the answers. We might not be able to provide the service that parents are asking, and that's okay as long as we're telling them that, as long as we're open and say, I can't do that, but I know of X, Y, and Z, or here's some options that you might like to explore to find that, rather than holding on to families and saying, yes, we'll see you again in another month or so and see what's happened. That we need to be able to provide information to parents about what is and isn't possible, and that parents are willing to put trust in the process if they are given this choice and relevant support and empowered to be a real key player in the process. So I would like to use this opportunity of Feeding Tube Awareness Week to let families know that there are people like myself who are trying to provide the research to back up what it is that we do to support children to learn to eat and drink. It may be that they do need a feeding tube, but that doesn't mean that they can't enjoy aspects of mealtime or they can't enjoy aspects of oral eating and drinking. It doesn't have to mean that they need to be closed away in a room to feed with no other social experience of meal times. we are trying to get the information out there through the hospital system, through parents, through therapy services, through the disability sector, through places like ausEE, that there are options for families, there are choices for families, and these should be made available to families. As I said, it might be that weaning's not appropriate, but actually providing your child or your adult or your teen with real food rather than a formula might be something that makes meal times just that little bit more normal for them, settles down the vomiting, helps their gut process food like you and I would, helps their bowels, changes their skin colour, makes their hair shine. You know, there are things that can be done rather than just pop a tube in and see what happens. And it's been a real privilege to be able to speak with you all today to help share some of that message. And I'm more than happy to support families, answer questions, and provide further information regarding support with tube feeding, with therapy options, with tube weaning options. We work with families Australia-wide to teach families how to teach their children to eat and drink. And also, as I said, very exciting, our WHOLE Enteral Nourishment product, which provides families with the opportunity to feed their loved one real food and throw that love into the food that they are providing their family. So thank you all for listening, and please do let me know if we can be of any assistance to you all.